Admiral Juan sat at the cold metal table and stared at the alien faces across from him. The meeting room on Harmony Prime Station felt like a tomb. For 8 long months, he had listened to the same words over and over. The Coalition wanted humans to surrender almost everything they had built among the stars. The war had been going on for 3 terrible years. Juan remembered every battle, every lost ship, every dead friend. His own fleet had been destroyed at Kepler 442. He still woke up at night hearing the screams over the radio as Coalition ships tore his people apart. Ambassador Yuna sat next to him, her hands folded on the table. She had tried so hard to find peace through words. Her voice was always calm, always patient, even when the aliens insulted humanity with every breath. Juan respected her for that, but he was tired of being patient. General Chris leaned back in his chair on Juan's other side. The younger officer had fresh ideas about how to fight this war, ideas that the Coalition would never expect. But those ideas meant walking away from this table and all its false promises. Supreme Counselor Vexithari spoke in his cold, mechanical voice. His species had ruled the Coalition for 2,000 years. They believed they were better than everyone else, especially humans. The terms are generous, he said. Your species may keep your home system and 3 colonies. All other human settlements must be abandoned. Juan felt his jaw tighten. Abandoned. The Coalition made it sound so simple. Just pack up and leave worlds where millions of humans had built lives, families, dreams. Worlds where children had been born who had never seen Earth. What about the civilian populations on those worlds? Yuna asked. Her voice stayed steady, but Juan could hear the pain underneath. They will be relocated, another Coalition member said. Juan had forgotten the alien's name. They all looked the same to him now with their superior smiles and dead eyes. We have prepared suitable accommodation facilities. Juan almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about it. Accommodation facilities. He had seen the Coalition's idea of accommodation, mass graves on New Sol, burning cities on Terra Nova, children crying for parents who would never come home. The Coalition has also prepared oversight protocols, Vexthari continued. Human expansion beyond approved boundaries will not be tolerated. Your military will be limited to defensive forces only. Your technology development will require Coalition approval. The words hit Juan like physical blows. They wanted to put humanity in a cage, a small, controlled cage, where humans could exist, but never grow, never explore, never become anything more than what the Coalition allowed. Yuna tried again. Counselor, surely we can discuss the civilian casualties from the orbital bombardments. International law clearly states, your laws do not apply here. Vexithari cut her off. The Coalition has maintained peace in this galaxy for millennia. Some destruction is unfortunate but necessary when dealing with aggressive species. Aggressive species. Juan's hands became fists under the table. Humans had been exploring space for less than 2 centuries. They had found worlds that nobody wanted, planets that other species had passed by. They had built settlements with their own sweat and blood. They had never attacked anyone first. But when humanity started to grow, started to trade with other species, started to show that maybe there were different ways to live among the stars, the Coalition had decided they were a threat. The war had started with Coalition ships attacking human trading posts. The Coalition had fired the first shots, killed the first civilians, broken the first treaties. Now they sat here acting like they were doing humanity a favor by letting them survive. Furthermore, another Coalition member said, human breeding will be regulated to prevent overpopulation of approved territories. Your birth rates have been deemed excessive. Something broke inside Juan. Not just anger, but something deeper. A realization that these talks were never about peace. They were about surrender. Complete, total surrender of everything that made humanity human. He thought about his daughter back on Earth. She was 7 years old and wanted to be a starship captain like her father. Under Coalition rules, she would never see the stars. She would never explore new worlds or meet strange alien friends or discover things that no human had ever seen before. She would live in a small box and die in that same small box, and the coalition would call it peace. Juan looked at Yuna. She was still trying, still believing that words could fix this. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but she kept talking, kept hoping. General Chris watched him carefully. The young officer's face was calm, but his eyes held the same fire that Juan felt burning in his chest. "The terms are final," Vexathari said. "You have 1 hour to accept or reject them. If you reject them, the war continues. Your people will suffer more losses. Your colonies will burn. Your children will die. This is your last chance for peace." Peace. Juan almost spoke the word out loud but stopped himself. This was not peace. This was death by slow strangulation. This was the end of human dreams, human hope, human future. This was everything his friends had died fighting against. He stood up. The sudden movement made everyone in the room freeze. Coalition guards reached for their weapons. Human security tensed. The air felt electric with danger, but Juan did not shout or threaten or make speeches. He simply looked at Vexathari and said 4 words that would change the galaxy forever. "We're done here." Yuna stared at him in shock. "Admiral, what are you doing?" Juan was already gathering his papers, his datapads, his notes. "Exactly what I should have done 8 months ago." He looked at Chris and nodded. The younger officer smiled and began packing his things too. The coalition representative sat frozen in confusion. This was not how these things worked. The weaker species always accepted terms eventually. They always chose survival over principles. They always bent the knee when faced with superior force. "You cannot simply leave," Vexathari said. His voice cracked with surprise. "The negotiations are not complete." "Yes, they are," Juan said. He was walking toward the door now, his team following. "You made your offer, we reject it. There's nothing else to discuss." "But the war," another alien began. "Will continue," Juan finished. "On our terms now, not yours." The last thing he heard as the doors closed behind him was Vexathari's voice, high with panic. "You cannot win. You are outnumbered 10-1. This is madness." Juan smiled for the first time in months. Maybe it was madness, but sometimes madness was better than surrender. The galaxy was about to learn what humans could do when they stopped trying to be reasonable. Captain Minho crouched in the shadows of the Coalition supply depot on Nexus 7. His team of 12 humans waited silently behind him. They had been traveling for 6 weeks through Coalition space, and nobody had seen them coming. The depot was huge, bigger than most human cities. Thousands of Coalition soldiers guarded it, along with automated defense systems that could destroy a battleship. But Minho was not planning to attack it like a battleship would. He spoke into his tiny radio. "G1, are you ready?" Dr. G1's voice came back from orbit, where she sat in a cloaked human ship no bigger than a fighter. "Give me 30 seconds to finish the upload." Minho smiled in the darkness. G1 was the smartest person he had ever met. While Coalition admirals expected human fleets to attack their bases, she had found a better way. She had learned to speak to Coalition computers in their own language, and then taught them to lie. "Upload complete," G1 said. "Their sensors now think you're a maintenance crew. You have 2 hours before the virus burns out." Minho signaled to his team. They stood up and walked toward the depot like they belonged there. Coalition guards looked right at them and saw nothing wrong. Their computers said these humans were supposed to be here, so they must be. The team split into 4 groups. Each group had a simple job. They were not there to steal weapons or kill guards. They were there to break things in ways that would take months to fix. Minho's group found the main computer center. The Coalition had built it deep underground behind walls of steel and energy shields. But they had forgotten that humans were good at getting into places they did not belong. "Deho was right," whispered Corporal Inha as she connected her device to a Coalition terminal. "They think like soldiers, not like thieves." Back on the occupied human world of New Busan, Deho had taught them this trick. He was not a soldier, just a factory worker who had refused to give up when the Coalition conquered his planet. He had shown them that the best way to fight was not with guns, but with stubbornness. Coalition administrators on New Busan were going crazy. Every order took twice as long as it should. Every supply request got lost in paperwork. Every computer system had small glitches that added up to big problems. The humans were not fighting back with violence, they were fighting back by being difficult. When they tell you to do something fast, Daeho had explained, do it slow. When they tell you to be quiet, ask lots of questions. When they want simple answers, give them complicated ones. Make them work for every little thing. Now Minho used the same idea on a bigger scale. His team planted tiny devices throughout the depot. The devices would not explode or cause fires. They would just make things stop working at the worst possible times. Coalition ships would arrive expecting fuel and find empty tanks. Supply convoys would get directions to the wrong planets. Food shipments would spoil because refrigeration units would develop mysterious problems. Nothing dramatic, nothing that screamed human sabotage. Just an endless series of small disasters that would drive Coalition logistics officers insane. Meanwhile, in deep space, Commander Sola was showing the Coalition Navy that humans had learned new tricks. Her small fleet of 20 ships moved through the outer systems like hunting wolves. Coalition Admiral Thekmore commanded 300 ships in this sector. He had been fighting space battles for 40 years and had never lost. He expected the CDAO human fleet to meet him in honorable combat, ship against ship, the way wars had always been fought. Instead, human ships appeared from nowhere, struck fast, and vanished before his forces could respond. They did not try to win big battles. They just made sure there were no big battles to win. Sola's ships hit supply lines, communication relays, and isolated patrol groups. They never stayed long enough for a real fight, never gave the Coalition fleet a target to shoot at. It was like trying to fight shadows. Where are they? Admiral Thekmore demanded as another supply convoy disappeared. His bridge crew had no answers. Human ships seemed to appear and vanish like ghosts. What he did not know was that Commander Sola had studied every Coalition battle for the past 50 years. She knew exactly how they fought, how they thought, how they planned. Coalition tactics had not changed in centuries because they had never needed to change. Human tactics changed every week. Dr. Jiwan worked day and night in her hidden laboratories, creating new viruses for Coalition computer systems. Each virus was different, designed for a specific target. She did not try to destroy Coalition networks all at once. Instead, she made them unreliable. Coalition officers would give orders that never reached their destinations. Supply requests would be doubled or tripled by helpful computer systems. Navigation data would be just slightly wrong, sending ships to empty space instead of their targets. Communication channels would develop strange delays that made coordination impossible. The Coalition had always depended on their technology being better than everyone else's. Now their technology was turning against them, and they did not understand how. Captain Minho's team finished their work at the supply depot and slipped away into the night. Behind them, the depot looked exactly the same as before. The guards had seen nothing unusual. The sensors showed no problems, but over the next few days everything would start to go wrong. Slowly at first, then faster and faster, until the depot became more trouble than it was worth. This was happening on 100 worlds across Coalition space. Small teams of humans appeared like ghosts, broke things in subtle ways, and disappeared. They did not fight fair because fair fighting was how you lost when the enemy had 10 times more ships than you did. Back on Harmony Prime Station, Coalition leaders watched their reports with growing confusion. Their forces were not being defeated in battle. They were being frustrated to death by problems that made no sense. How are we losing supply depots to ghosts? Supreme Counselor Vexithari demanded. How are our communications failing when our equipment is perfect? How are human pirates outrunning our fastest ships? His advisors had no good answers. The Coalition had rules for war, procedures that had worked for thousands of years. But humans were not following the rules. They were writing new ones. On New Busan, Daeho smiled as he read the daily efficiency reports. Coalition productivity on his world had dropped by 60% in 2 months. Not because of strikes or violence, but because every human worker had become an expert at creative incompetence. They want us to be slaves, he told his people, but even slaves can be bad at their jobs. Captain Minho and his team struck 3 more targets that week. Each attack was different, each one designed to create maximum confusion with minimum risk. Coalition forces began jumping at shadows, seeing human saboteurs everywhere. Commander Sola's fleet grew bolder, hitting targets deeper in Coalition space. Her ships moved in patterns that made no sense to traditional military thinking, but were perfectly logical if you understood that the goal was not to win battles, but to avoid them entirely. Dr. Jiwan's computer viruses evolved and spread, turning Coalition efficiency into Coalition chaos. Every day brought new system failures, new glitches, new reasons why simple tasks became complicated nightmares. The galaxy watched in amazement as the mighty Coalition war machine began to stumble and stagger. Human forces were still outnumbered, 10-1, but somehow that did not seem to matter anymore. On Earth, President Gina received daily reports from across human space. The news was better than anyone had dared to hope. Humans were not winning the war in any traditional sense, but they were not losing it either. And for the first time since the fighting began, that felt like victory enough. The Coalition had expected humans to fight like everyone else. They had prepared for human fleets and human armies and human heroes charging into battle with flags flying. They had not prepared for human stubbornness, human creativity, and human refusal to follow anyone else's rules. Now they were learning what happened when you forced humanity to get creative about survival. President Gina stood before the cameras in her office on Earth. Behind her, through the large windows, the lights of Geneva sparkled in the evening darkness. But tonight, people across the galaxy would see this broadcast, whether the Coalition wanted them to or not. Dr. Jiwan had worked for weeks to make this possible. Coalition jammers tried to block human transmissions, but Jiwan's programs slipped through their networks like water through a net. Every screen in Coalition space would show this message, and there was nothing their leaders could do to stop it. Citizens of the galaxy, President Gina began, her voice calm but firm. For 3 years, the Coalition has told you that humanity is a threat to galactic peace. They have said we are aggressive, dangerous, and must be controlled. Tonight I want to show you the truth about who is really threatening peace in our galaxy. The image changed to show Specialist Yuna in a secure bunker somewhere in Coalition space. She had spent 2 years working undercover, gathering evidence that would shock the galaxy. Her face was tired, but her eyes burned with determination. "My name is Yunha," she said. "I am a human intelligence officer, but more importantly, I am a witness. For 2 years I have lived among Coalition worlds, and I have seen what they do not want you to see." The screen filled with documents, videos, and recordings that Yunha had collected. Evidence of Coalition crimes that went back not just years, but centuries. Mass graves on worlds that were supposed to be integrated peacefully. Prison camps for entire species that had dared to ask for independence. Children taken from their families and never seen again. President Gina's voice continued as the images played. The Coalition has not been keeping peace. They have been enforcing silence. Any species that grows too strong, that questions their rule, that shows signs of independence, disappears. Not in war, but in what they call re-education programs. Kyung-min appeared on screen next. He was young, barely 20, but his eyes looked much older. He had escaped from a Coalition facility on the edge of known space, one of only 12 survivors out of thousands. "They told us we were going to learn Coalition values," Kyung-min said, his voice shaking. "They said it would make us better citizens. Instead, they tried to erase everything we were. Our language, our culture, our memories of home. Those who resisted were sent to medical treatment. None of them came back." The broadcast showed more evidence, recordings of Coalition officials discussing the final solution to the human problem, plans to divide humanity into work groups, to sterilize populations they considered excess, to turn human worlds into resource extraction sites operated by slave labor. Coalition leaders across the galaxy watched in horror as their darkest secrets spilled across every communication channel. Supreme Counselor Vexthari screamed orders at his technical staff, but Dr. Jiwan's infiltration was too deep, too clever. The Coalition's own networks were broadcasting their crimes against them. President Gina returned to the screen. This is why we walked away from their peace talks. They offered us survival, but at the cost of becoming everything we swore we would never be. They wanted us to accept that some species deserve freedom and others deserve chains. We refused to accept that. On the Coalition capital world, panic spread through the government halls. Neutral species that had stayed out of the war began asking hard questions. How many of their own people had disappeared in Coalition integration programs? How many times had they been told that extinct species had joined willingly with the Coalition? Admiral Taeyong appeared in the broadcast from his command ship. Behind him, the bridge showed a mixture of humans and aliens working together, species that had secretly joined humanity's cause. We did not start this war, he said, but we will finish it. Not just for humanity, but for every species the Coalition has murdered in the name of peace. The galaxy deserves better than a choice between slavery and death. The transmission showed Coalition prison worlds that human forces had liberated in recent months. Survivors of dozens of species that the galaxy thought were extinct. Children who had never seen their home worlds because their parents had been killed for asking for basic rights. Coalition Admiral Thekmore watched the broadcast from his flagship and felt something he had never felt before: doubt. He had spent his whole career believing the Coalition was protecting civilized species from chaos and war, but the evidence filling his screens made him wonder if he had been protecting predators, not prey. On Coalition worlds, citizens who had lived their whole lives believing their government was just and fair saw proof of systematic genocide. Some refused to believe it, calling it human lies and propaganda, but others began to remember friends who had vanished, questions that were never answered, stories that never made sense. Dr. Jiwan's computer viruses had done more than disrupt Coalition military systems. They had copied every classified file, every secret order, every hidden communication. Now all of it was flowing across the galaxy's information networks like a flood. Species that had been integrated into the Coalition centuries ago saw records proving their ancestors had fought to the last rather than surrender peacefully. Worlds that had been told their populations had volunteered for relocation saw the truth, forced marches that killed millions. President Gina concluded her message with words that would be remembered forever. The Coalition offered humanity a choice: surrender or die. We choose a third option. We choose to fight for a galaxy where that choice never has to be made again. The transmission ended, but its effects spread like ripples in a pond. On Coalition worlds, protests began in the streets. On neutral worlds, governments called emergency sessions to discuss what they had learned. On worlds ruled by species allied with the Coalition, subject populations began asking why their leaders had never told them about the prison camps and mass graves. Supreme Counselor Vexthari found himself facing questions from his own advisors, many of whom had not known the full extent of what the Coalition had done. Some defended the policies as necessary for galactic order. Others demanded investigations and reforms. But it was too late for reforms. The galaxy had seen the truth, and the truth was spreading faster than any Coalition force could stop it. Admiral Taeyong received a coded message 3 days after the broadcast. It was from Coalition Admiral Thekmore, requesting a secret meeting. The message was simple: I want to discuss terms for my fleet's surrender to your cause. He was not the only Coalition officer having second thoughts. Across their empire, military commanders began to question orders that seemed designed more to hide evidence than win battles. Ship crews started asking why they were fighting to preserve a system that had murdered billions. Dr. Jiwan monitored Coalition communications as their government tried desperately to control the damage. She watched their leaders argue about whether to declare martial law, whether to cut off all outside communication, whether to begin emergency population relocations. before more evidence could surface. Every desperate measure they considered just proved that President Gina's broadcast had been telling the truth. On New Busan, Daeho organized the first open resistance rally since the coalition occupation began. Thousands of humans gathered in the city square, no longer hiding their defiance. Coalition forces surrounded the crowd but did not fire. Too many neutral observers were watching now, and the coalition could not afford more bad publicity. Captain, Minho received new orders from Earth. Human Special Forces teams were no longer limited to sabotage and disruption. They were authorized to liberate coalition prison facilities and rescue survivors who could testify about what they had experienced. Commander, Sola's fleet was reinforced by ships from 3 neutral species that had decided they could not stay neutral anymore. Her forces were still smaller than any major coalition fleet, but they were growing stronger every day as more species joined the alliance against coalition rule. The galaxy was choosing sides, and humanity was no longer choosing alone. What had started as a human rebellion was becoming something much larger, a war for the soul of galactic civilization. Vexathari made one last attempt to stop the spreading rebellion. He ordered coalition forces to begin pacification operations on worlds where protests were growing too large. It was the worst mistake he could have made. Images of coalition troops firing on peaceful protesters spread even faster than President Gina's original broadcast had. Species that had been undecided about the war saw coalition forces killing civilians who had done nothing but ask questions about their government's actions. The galaxy had seen enough. Humanity had shown them the truth. But now they could see it with their own eyes. The coalition's empire of lies was crumbling, and everyone knew there would be no going back. Ambassador Jinhee walked through the corridors of Liberation Station, humanity's newest diplomatic facility. 6 months ago, this had been a coalition prison asteroid where thousands of political prisoners lived in darkness. Now it was the meeting, place for representatives from 43 species who had joined the Free Species Alliance. The transformation amazed her every day. Where once there had been cells and torture chambers, now there were conference rooms and cultural centers. Former prisoners worked alongside their liberators to build something the galaxy had never seen before. A truly democratic government where every species had an equal voice. Ambassador, called Councillor Biom as she passed his office. He had been a coalition moderate until the human broadcast showed him the truth about his government. Now he worked 18 hours a day helping other coalition officials defect to the alliance. The Zentari delegation has arrived. They're ready to sign the charter. Jinhee smiled. The Zentari had been coalition allies for 800 years, but the evidence of genocide had shaken them to their core. Their decision to join the alliance would be felt across the galaxy. In the main conference hall, she found representatives from dozens of species working together on plans that would have been impossible under coalition rule. Humans sat next, to former enemies sharing technology and tactics freely. Species that had been forbidden to contact each other for centuries were now close allies. Captain Solgi entered the hall carrying reports from the front lines. At 25, she was the youngest fleet captain in human history, but her mixed species crew trusted her completely. They had won 7 battles in the past month, not through superior firepower but through the kind of creative thinking that came from having different species work together. Fleet Admiral Dongyun wants to brief you on Operation Horizon, she told Jinhee. We're ready to begin the liberation campaign. Operation Horizon was the Alliance's most ambitious plan yet. Instead of fighting the coalition fleet by fleet, they would strike at 17 prison worlds simultaneously. Each world held millions of political prisoners from dozens of species. Freeing them would not only save lives, but would provide the Alliance with new recruits and proof of coalition crimes. Fleet Admiral Dongyun appeared on the main screen from his command ship. Behind him, the bridge showed the largest mixed-species fleet ever assembled. Human ships flew alongside vessels from 30 different worlds, their crews working together with an efficiency that amazed military observers. We launch in 6 hours, he announced. Every target has been scouted, every approach planned. But I want to be clear, this is not a conquest mission. We're going to free prisoners, not capture territory. We're going to expose truth, not spread propaganda. We're going to show the galaxy what liberation looks like. Jinhee felt pride swell in her chest. 2 years ago, humans had walked away from peace talks because they refused to accept slavery for themselves. Now they were leading a galactic war to end slavery for everyone. The operation began at exactly noon, Galactic Standard Time. 17. Alliance fleets struck 17 different worlds, each one a coalition stronghold that was supposed to be impossible to attack. But the coalition had made their plans assuming they would face traditional fleets using traditional tactics. Captain Solgi led the attack on Kepler Prime, a world that held over 2 million prisoners from the extinct Varian species. Except they were not extinct at all, just hidden away where the galaxy could not see them. Her fleet included ships from 6 different species, each one contributing unique capabilities. Human ships provided stealth technology that let them approach undetected. Centauri vessels carried powerful shields that could protect the rescue shuttles. Former coalition ships that had defected brought knowledge of defensive systems and security codes. Remember, Sulgi told her mixed crew as they approached the prison planet, we're not here to fight guards. We're here to open doors. Every minute we spend fighting is a minute we're not spending on rescue operations. Coalition Admiral Techmore watched the 17 simultaneous attacks from his command center and felt his heart break. He had officially defected to the Alliance 3 weeks ago, bringing 12 ships and their crews with him. Now he was helping coordinate rescue operations at facilities he had once helped guard. Sulgi's team has breached the surface installations, reported his human communications officer. They're beginning prisoner evacuations. On Kepler Prime, coalition guards found themselves facing something they had never trained for. The Alliance forces were not trying to kill them or capture their facilities. They were simply ignoring them while they freed prisoners and collected evidence of crimes. Some guards fled rather than fight for a system they had begun to doubt. Others surrendered when they saw recordings of coalition atrocities that their own officers had hidden from them. A few fought to the end, but they were overwhelmed by Alliance forces that had planned for every possibility. The real shock came when the prisoners were freed. Species that the galaxy thought were dead walked into the sunlight for the first time in decades. Children who had been born in captivity saw the sky and stars. Families that had been separated for years were reunited. But more importantly, they could testify about what the coalition had done to them. Every survivor was living proof that coalition integration programs were actually genocide programs designed to eliminate entire species, slowly and quietly. Supreme Counselor Vexthari watched 17 worlds fall to Alliance forces in a single day and knew his empire was doomed. Half his fleet commanders had either defected or refused orders to fire on liberation forces. The other half were too busy dealing with rebellions on their own worlds to mount effective counterattacks. "Sir," his aide reported, "the Planetary Defense Corps is requesting permission to use planet-killer weapons against the human homeworlds." Vexathari stared at him in shock. "You want to destroy entire planets? It's the only way to stop this rebellion before it spreads further." For a moment, Vexthari considered it. One command could wipe out billions of humans and break the spirit of the Alliance. It would be the ultimate demonstration of coalition power, a message that would echo across the galaxy for 1,000 years. Then he remembered the images from President Gina's broadcast. The mass graves, the prison camps, the children who had disappeared. How many planets had the coalition already destroyed in secret? How many species had they wiped out completely? "No," he said quietly. "I will not give that order." His aide looked shocked. "Sir, without decisive action we will lose this war." "We have already lost," Vexthari replied. "The question now is whether we lose with some dignity intact." The order was never given, but word of the request spread through coalition military channels. Ship commanders who had been wavering in their loyalty saw that their government was willing to commit genocide to stay in power. Many of them decided they could not serve leaders who would consider such actions. Ambassador Jinhee received reports of coalition fleet defections throughout the day. 3 entire battle groups had surrendered to Alliance forces. Dozens of individual ships had switched sides. Even more had simply gone home to defend their own species' worlds from coalition retaliation. By evening, Operation Horizon was declared a complete success. 17 prison worlds had been liberated, over 8 million prisoners had been freed, and massive amounts of evidence had been collected proving coalition crimes. But more importantly, the galaxy had seen that the coalition could be beaten. Neutral, species that had been afraid to join the alliance began sending secret messages offering support. Coalition member species started asking hard questions about their government's actions. Some began declaring independence outright, knowing that alliance forces would help protect them from retaliation. Captain Sulgi returned to Liberation Station with the first rescued Varian survivors in 3 centuries. They were weak from captivity, but their eyes blazed with hope. Their species was not extinct. Their culture could be rebuilt. Their children could learn the songs and stories that the coalition had tried to erase. Fleet Admiral Dong Hyun addressed the Alliance Council that night with news that would have been impossible to imagine when humans first walked away from peace talks. The coalition empire is collapsing, he reported. Not because we destroyed it, but because its own citizens are choosing freedom over fear. We are no longer fighting to survive. We are fighting to build something better. Counselor Biam worked late into the night, processing requests from coalition officials who wanted to defect to the alliance. Many of them had evidence of more crimes, more cover-ups, more secret facilities where prisoners might still be held. Dr. Jiwan monitored coalition communications and watched their government tear itself apart. Some officials wanted to negotiate with the alliance. Others wanted to fight to the bitter end. A few wanted to destroy everything rather than surrender power. But the decision was no longer theirs to make. Across coalition space, populations were rising up against their rulers. Ships were defecting. Entire star systems were declaring independence. The empire that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years was crumbling in a matter of months. President Gina received a coded message from Supreme Counselor Vexithari that night. It was a simple request. Admiral Huan stood on the bridge of his flagship as the massive Allied fleet approached the coalition capital world. 2 years ago, he had been a broken man who walked away from peace talks because he could not bear to surrender humanity's future. Now he commanded ships from 60 different species, united in purpose and hope. The coalition homeworld of Hegemon Prime had never been attacked in its 5,000-year history. Its massive orbital defenses could destroy entire fleets. Its planetary shields could withstand any bombardment. But today those defenses stood silent and dark. "Sir," reported Commander Young-ho, "we're receiving surrender signals from the orbital stations. Coalition Admiral Kresh is requesting permission to come aboard and discuss terms." Huan nodded. The young commander represented everything this war had been fought for. A future where different species could work together as equals. His bridge crew included humans, former coalition members, and refugees from a dozen liberated worlds, all working in perfect harmony. "Grant permission," Huan said. "But make it clear that we're not here to conquer. We're here to liberate." Guionrang, the planet's surface, Supreme Counselor Vexthari sat in his empty council chambers and watched his empire die on the news feeds. 3/4 of coalition space had declared independence. Most of their fleet had either defected or simply gone home. The few forces still loyal to the old government were too busy protecting their own worlds to mount any meaningful resistance. He had spent his whole life believing that the coalition was necessary to maintain galactic order. Without strong central control, he had been taught, the galaxy would descend into chaos and war. But looking at the Allied fleet above his world, he saw not chaos but cooperation on a scale he had never imagined possible. President Gina's voice came over every communication channel on the planet, but her message was not one of conquest or revenge. "Citizens of Hegemon Prime," she said, "the Allied forces are here not as conquerors but as liberators. We have come to end a system that has caused suffering across the galaxy for thousands of years. We have come to offer you a choice your government never allowed others, the choice to be free." In the streets of the coalition capital, crowds gathered to watch the Allied ships descend. Many were afraid, expecting the bombardment and mass executions that coalition forces had used when conquering other worlds. Instead, they saw ships landing peacefully in the city squares, their crews emerging to offer medical aid and food to anyone who needed it. Captain Sulgi led one of the first landing teams. Her mixed-species crew set up aid stations and began treating coalition civilians who had been injured in the recent riots and protests. They made no distinction between those who had supported the old government and those who had opposed it. "We're not here for revenge," she told the crowds through translators. "We're here to build something better, something that works for everyone." Commander Young-ho worked with Allied intelligence teams to secure coalition government facilities. They were not looking for treasure or weapons to steal. They were looking for records, evidence, and proof of what the coalition had done to maintain power. Every document they found would be made public, ensuring that future generations would know the truth. Dr. Jiwon had already penetrated every coalition database on the planet, but instead of using her access to destroy or corrupt their systems, she was copying everything: financial records, military communications, secret orders, hidden research projects. The galaxy would see it all, and from that transparency would come justice. Fleet Admiral Dongyun established his headquarters in the old Coalition Military Command Center. But instead of issuing orders for occupation forces, he was coordinating the largest humanitarian operation in galactic history. Millions of political prisoners were being freed from secret facilities across Coalition space. Entire species that had been declared extinct were being rediscovered in hidden camps. Families separated for generations were being reunited. The Pori War Crimes Tribunal began 3 days after the capital fell. But it was unlike any military court in history. Instead of victors judging the defeated, representatives from every species in the galaxy would hear evidence and decide on justice. Together, former Supreme Counselor Vexithari was among the first to testify. He did not try to defend his actions or claim he was only following orders. Instead, he told the truth about how the coalition had operated, how decisions had been made, how genocide had been disguised as policy. "We told ourselves we were maintaining order," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We told ourselves that some sacrifice was necessary for the greater good. We told ourselves so many lies that we began to believe them. The galaxy deserves better than leaders who lie to themselves." The testimony took months. Survivors from dozens of species told their stories. Coalition officials revealed the inner workings of their government. Military officers explained how ordinary soldiers had been turned into instruments of genocide. Scientists detailed experiments that violated every principle of medical ethics. But the trial was not about punishment. It was about truth. Every word was broadcast across the galaxy, ensuring that no one could ever again claim they did not know what had happened. President Gina addressed the forming Galactic Democratic Council from the same chambers where coalition rulers had once issued their decrees. But the chamber had been rebuilt, redesigned so that every species had an equal voice. Every representative could see and be seen by all others. "We did not fight this war to replace one empire with another," she said. "We fought it to ensure that no empire could ever again rule through fear and deception. We fought it to create a galaxy where diversity is strength, where cooperation is valued more than control, where no species ever again has to choose between freedom and survival." The new galactic government was unlike anything that had existed before. Instead of a single ruler or ruling council, decisions would be made by consensus among all member species. Instead of secret policies enforced by military might, all laws would be debated openly and voted on by elected representatives. Commander Young-ho, now promoted to admiral, took charge of the new Galactic Defense Force. But this military was different, too. Its mission was not to conquer or control, but to protect member worlds from external threats and to prevent any single species from becoming powerful enough to dominate others. Captain Sulgi became the first director of the Interspecies Cooperation Agency, tasked with helping different cultures learn to work together effectively. Her first project was establishing schools where children from different species could learn together, ensuring that future generations would see diversity as normal rather than threatening. Dr. Jiwon led the technology sharing initiative, breaking down the barriers that had kept species isolated and competitive. Coalition research that had been hidden for security reasons was made freely available. Scientific advances that might have taken centuries to develop were shared across the galaxy in months. 2 years after the fall of the Coalition capital, Ambassador Jinhee stood before the completed Galactic Democratic Assembly. Representatives from over 200 species filled the Great Hall, debating policies that would affect trillions of lives. They argued, sometimes loudly, but they also listened to each other with respect and genuine interest in finding solutions that worked for everyone. A young alien child approached her after the session, one of many visitors who came to see the new government in action. "Ambassador," the child asked, "my teacher says humans could have accepted peace with the Coalition. Why did you walk away from those talks?" Jinhee smiled and knelt down to the child's level. "Because some things are worth fighting for, even when you might lose. Freedom is one of those things. The right to choose your own path is one of those things. And the belief that everyone deserves those rights is definitely worth fighting for." "Theo," child nodded seriously. "My people were in Coalition camps for 300 years. My great-grandmother says she never thought she would see the sky again. And now? Now she teaches flying lessons to human children on our world. She says the sky belongs to everyone who dares to reach for it." Admiral Huan walked through the memorial garden that had been built on the site of the old Coalition security headquarters. The names of every victim of Coalition genocide were carved into walls of stone that stretched for kilometers. But it was not a monument to death, it was a promise to life. Never again would the galaxy allow such crimes to go unnoticed or unpunished. He found President Gina there, as he often did in the evenings. She came to remember, but also to renew her commitment to the principles they had fought for. "Any regrets?" he asked her. She considered the question carefully. "About walking away from those talks? Never. About the cost of the war that followed? Every day. But I look at this galaxy now, at what we've built together, and I know it was worth it. The Coalition offered us survival," Juan said, "and we chose to live instead," Gina replied. Above them, ships from dozens of species moved through the space lanes around the capital world. Some were traders, others were diplomats, still others were simply tourists eager to see how different cultures lived. The galaxy had become a place where differences were celebrated rather than feared, where cooperation created possibilities that no single species could achieve alone.